Hello everyone, thanks for joining me. My name is Christopher Donald and welcome to my channel. This is going to be another one of my uh, debunking ceramics myths videos. Probably be doing quite a bit of these. Turns out they're fairly popular and there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So let's go ahead and jump in. This one is on the idea that a hydrometer is an inaccurate way of measuring what thickness your glaze needs to be in order for you to apply it to your piece and have it come out the way that you're expecting. And I phrase that very carefully because a hydrometer is a relative setting. It's a relative reading, meaning that what I consider good or correct is a sliding scale. Let's say, for this glaze, for example, I want it to look like this when it comes out. So the way that you use a hydrometer to achieve that is that I mix my glaze. I mix it to the point where visually I think it looks right. I then do a test dipping. I then do a scratch test on that glaze to see if, according to a scratch test, which is very accurate, whether or not the glaze is thin, regular, or thick. If it seems like it's what I'm expecting, like it's regular, then I will take a hydrometer reading. I will be sure that I use the hydrometer the same way each time. So when I was doing production, we would wet the hydrometer first. We would hold it right over the surface of the liquid and then release it. Then we would take a reading from there. We would not hold it 6 inches above and drop it, 3 inches above and drop it, 1 inch above and drop it, stick it in the liquid. You do the same thing each time. You have to have consistency in how you're using the tool to measure accurately. So then I would get a reading from the hydrometer. Let's just arbitrarily say it's a 10 to 40 scale and I get a 25. All right, so when I have the glaze mixed to a consistency that produces a correct scratch test for this glaze, I get a reading of 25. I then fire the piece. If it comes out the way that I'm expecting, if it looks nice, if this is my idea of how I want this glaze to look, I now in my notes can say that with this glaze, using this hydrometer, a reading of 25 gives me a scratch test result that shows that I'm going to get the glaze that I want. I'll do a few more. If it comes out consistent, that goes into my glazing logbook as being an absolute fact for me. That's what works for me on my bisque at the temperature that I bisque, at the thickness that I do my walls. I can confirm I have a benchmark for what is giving me good results in my situation. Now, can I tell you that not knowing how thick you throw, not knowing what temperature you bisque at, not knowing what you think is a nice looking glaze, can I say to you that a 25 on my hydrometer means that your glaze is going to come out the way that you want it? Absolutely not. It is a relative scale. It is up to your opinion on what is good and what isn't. Let's say it's a clear glaze. A scratch test on a clear glaze, I want it to look fairly thin because most clear glazes get a little bit foggy if they're too thick. So for a clear glaze, I'm going to want a different hydrometer reading. I'm going to want a different scratch test. But I want some way of being able to tell what I'm getting. And that scale is achieved through me monitoring scratch tests, me making test firings, and me doing hydrometer readings with my hydrometer and noting what that setting is so that when things are working, I have something that's repeatable. But if you aren't getting good results from a hydrometer, it probably means one of several things. One, your hydrometer is not the correct hydrometer for the kind of liquid that you're trying to measure. We had different ones for different things. If you're using a glaze, or I almost said slip, which is a good Freudian, change there. So if you're measuring slip, you're probably going to need a heavier hydrometer than if you're measuring glaze. If you're measuring Shino, you're going to need a heavier hydrometer than if you're measuring clear. The viscosity of your solution affects how heavy your hydrometer needs to be in order to effectively give you a reading by just dropping it in. If it's thick enough, like with slips, you can drop it in and the thing just sticks in the top of the slip, because hydrometers also have air in them and they will float a little bit. That's kind of partly how they work. So they have to be heavy enough to get their readings, their measurements down into the liquid so you have something to actually measure. So it could be that your hydrometer is simply not the correct weight for the liquid that you're trying to measure. The other is that you're just inconsistent. You drop it at different points and you don't consistently wet it, or whatever. You have to be consistent if you want consistent results from a hydrometer. There is nothing about the science of how a hydrometer measures that is faulty. They work. If you're unable to get them to work, it doesn't negate the science. If I get into a Formula One car, I probably can't make it perform. That does not mean that there is something wrong with that Formula One car. It just means I don't know what I'm doing. So hydrometers absolutely work. We use them for very accurate results in production again and again and again for slips and glazes, multiple types of glazes, multiple firing temperatures. They absolutely work. They also absolutely work for doing slip casting. So nothing wrong with the tool, but you do need to learn how to use measurement tools effectively to get the most out of them. So that is the best way of using a hydrometer. Okay,